Now, this is a story from the United States, but it's actually an older story from a place far across the Atlantic Ocean. This is the story of Wiley and the Hairy Man. Now, Wiley and his mother lived deep, deep, deep in the swamp country. They had a home in there, a farm, and Wiley's dogs, and Wiley's father was gone. You see, he'd fallen off a riverboat, and everybody said he sank too fast for it to be natural. He must have been grabbed and dragged under by the Hairy Man. The Hairy Man was the monster that lived deep, deep in the forests and swamps and did terrible things to people. At least that's what everybody said, but nobody ever saw him. Nobody ever came back to talk about it, ever saw him, that is. Well, Wiley's mother made him keep his dogs with him when he went out because everybody knew the Hairy Man didn't like dogs. But one day, Wiley's mother said, "Go get some firewood and some kindling. We need to build a fire for me to cook." And he went out, and there wasn't much wood near the house. And he went just a little ways into the forest, and a little ways deeper into the forest, and he'd forgotten to bring his dogs with him because it was such a little chore. And then as he got deeper into the forest, just deep enough to find firewood, there was a voice behind him. "Hello, Wiley." Wiley turned around, and there was a great, big, big, big hairy man. He was covered with hair, almost like a bear, but he wasn't a bear. He talked. That was another clue that he wasn't a bear. And instead of feet, he had hooves, like a great big cow. But his teeth were sharp and pointy, and he said, "I wonder if you're as tasty as your daddy was." And Wiley thought to himself, "I don't want to find out, and I don't want you to find out either." And he thought to himself, "He's got feet like a cow, and cows don't climb trees." So Wiley, he quickly climbed up the nearest big tree he could, as high as he could get. And the Hairy Man said, "That's okay. I'll just wait. You got to come down sometime." And Wiley, he thought and thought, and he knew that the Hairy Man was supposed to be a magician and proud of his tricks. And Wiley said, "While we're waiting, could you show me some of your magic tricks? I've heard you can make stuff appear and disappear. Can you really do that?" "Sure," said the Hairy Man. And he pointed at a tree branch near Wiley off to his right and said, "It's gone." And Wiley turned and looked and said, "What's gone?" "Why, that bird's nest that was there." "You can't fool me," said Wiley. "I didn't see any bird's nest. I don't know you made it disappear." "How about you make something special disappear?" Now, my mama made me a special belt out of rope, and you know she's a conjure woman that can do her own magic, so she made my belt special. I'll bet you can't make my rope belt disappear. "I could make all the rope in the county disappear," said the Hairy Man. "Why, watch this." And he gestured and wide out with his arms. Poof! Wiley's belt disappeared, and so did all the rope for miles around, including the rope that was holding his dogs back at the yard. And Wiley looked and thought and said, "Here, dogs! Here, dogs!" and yelled out. And there in the distance was the sound of Wiley's dogs barking and baying and yelling and running toward him. Well, the hairy man heard the dogs getting closer and said, "Ooh, you tricked me, but I'll get you for that." Well, sir, Wiley, he got down from that tree and walked home with his dogs, and his mama was so happy to see him, and he told her what happened and how the hairy man had gotten him up into a tree. Ooh. Well, the good news is that if you trick the hairy man 3 times in a row, he has to promise to leave you safe. But nobody had ever done that. So she thought, you got to trick the hairy man 2 more times to be safe. And Wiley said, "Don't you worry, I can do that." Well, they thought and came up with an idea to trick the hairy man the next time. So the next day, Wiley went into the woods again to get firewood. And again, he didn't take his dogs with him. He didn't go as far into the woods, but far enough to be dangerous. And sure enough, the hairy man said, "Hello, Wiley. I've come to get you." And Wiley said, I'm going to climb a tree again. And he climbed up into a tree again. But, you see, I'm curious about your magic. I've heard that one of the things you can do with your magic is to turn into things. Can you really turn into other things? "Sure," said the hairy man. And he turned into a great big bear. "Wow," said Wiley. "That's pretty impressive. Can you turn into a gator?" And poof, the hairy man turned into the biggest alligator Wiley had ever seen. Those are pretty big, though. I'll bet you can't turn into something small. "Sure I can." And poof, just like that, the hairy man, who had turned into a bear, who had turned into an alligator, turned into a little baby possum. And Wiley jumped down from the tree and stuffed that possum into a bag and tied it shut and ran to the nearest river and tossed that bag into the river. Well, he thought maybe he was done with the hairy man for sure, but as he got away from the river, he heard a voice coming from the river. "You tricked me again, but that bag wasn't strong enough to hold me." Oh, thought Wiley, well, I've got to trick him one more time. And he went home and told his mama what had happened, and she said, "Let's figure out what to do. I'll bet the hairy man comes here looking for you next. Go out and get one of the baby pigs out of the pig pen." "A baby pig?" Well, sure, Wiley went out and got one, and his mama cleaned it up and put it into Wiley's bed and tucked the covers over it. And the baby pig went to sleep right there. And she said, "Wiley, hide under the bed." And Wiley hid under the bed. Well, sure enough, the hairy man came pounding at the door. And Wiley's mama went, "Who's there?" "It's me, the hairy man. I've come for what is mine to eat." You can't just eat my baby." "Sure I can, or else I'll put a curse on your house." "You can't do that." "Sure, I could set it on fire." "If you set it on fire, I'll put the fire out." "How about if I make all your crops go bad and your cow go dry and all of the things on your farm be bad all at the same time?" And she said, "Well, all right. If you take my baby and promise to leave this farm alone forever, then okay." And she opened the door, And the hairy man went stomping into the house and went over to the bed that Wiley was under, because he could smell Wiley's smell. And he said, "All right, I'm going to take what's yours, your baby, and leave you alone forever." And he went over and pulled up the blanket. And there, instead of Wiley, was a baby pig. "You tricked me! This isn't your son!" "I said it was a baby. I didn't say a baby what?" "Ooh! Now you got to obey what you said. You take that baby pig and you get out of here and never come back." "Ooh," said the hairy man, and he grabbed that baby pig and he went stomping out of the house and stomping through the yard and out of that yard, and he didn't even close the gate. But you know what? That hairy man had to keep his promise. And so it was that Wiley and his mama and the rest of the farm animals, except for that one baby pig, all lived happily ever after. And that's the story of how Wiley tricked the hairy man.